Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. And this is Jade. And today's video is going to be talking about my very first one ever. Jade, tell me what you want. What's going on? Jade, what's going on? What? Tell me what you want. Are you needing to go out? Are you needing to go out? Do you? You need to go out? Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel again. And as you can see, Jade is very excited to be on camera tonight. No, she's not. She's never excited. What do you think about that camera? Does that scare you when you see that dog in there? You think that dog's going to get you? No, that dog ain't going to get you. That's you. You can't get yourself. Anyway, I'm going to do a video now about my first one ever. My very first one ever. So let me set her down so she can kind of rest. She wants to be in here with me, so she's on my lap. And the first thing I want to tell you about is my very first car that I ever had. Now, I was married when I got my first car, and my husband and I had a car together. It was a 69 Chevy Chevelle, but that was a family car. We both drove that. So when I went to work, I needed my own car because he worked days and I worked nights. And we had to work out a way to get me to work if I didn't have a vehicle. So I ended up buying a car of my own. That was my very own car that I drove. And it was a 1971 Chevy Camaro. It was blue with a black vinyl top, bucket seats, and it had an 8-track player in it. And I loved that car. I was stupid to get rid of it. And the only reason I did get rid of it, my husband and I got a divorce. And I had a boyfriend that wanted to have a pickup truck. And he didn't have a pickup truck. So I traded my car for a pickup truck. That was stupid, I know. Because whenever him and I broke up, I ended up with a truck. You know, that's kind of weird, a single girl having a truck, isn't it? I mean, anyway. And then the next thing I want to tell you about is my very first job that I ever had. I was also married, and I was about 16 or 17. Probably more closer to 17. And my first job was as a waitress in a little cafe out on the highway, close to the town where I lived in. You know, it was several miles away, but it was pretty close to the town that I lived in. And my husband used to take me to work there and drop me off. And that was before I started to work at the factory, which was much later on. And then the next thing I want to tell you about is my first boyfriend. Now, I started dating, I guess if you want to call it that. I started being interested in boys when I was about 12 or 13. And I know that's young, and that's probably why I ended up getting married so young. But I was about 13 when I met this boy. And I don't know why this sticks in my mind all these years, but because I've had lots of boyfriends that I can't even think about. But I can still remember his name. He was my very first boyfriend. Maybe that's why, because he's my very first boyfriend. And his name was Eugene Nance. So Eugene, if you're out there watching this, I'm sorry you missed out on it. Anyway, I was about 13. I didn't go with him very long. But anyway, you know, it's kind of a puppy love deal. So that was that. And then the next thing I want to tell you about was the very first time that I ever saw snow in my life. As I've mentioned before in other videos, my family moved back and forth between California and Missouri constantly. So sometimes in the winter we were out in California and they don't have snow down in the part of California that I lived in. They do up in the mountains in California, but I was never there. This first winter that I saw snow, we had made a trip back to Kennett, Missouri, to see my grandma. And I don't know if we were there for a vacation or if we had come back there to live or what. But anyway, it was during the winter and it did snow. And it was just a very light, powdery, dusty snow. And I remember, and I think I've talked about this in another video somewhere. My dad took me out there. He said, you kids come out here, because he knew none of us had ever seen snow. And he took us outside, and there was snow all over my grandma's car. And everything was covered in white. It was beautiful. And I remember I reached out and I touched that snow because I had never seen snow before, and I didn't know what it felt like. And it was real thin and powdery, and it was cold. And I still remember this. And I know I said this in that other video too, but I said, "Ooh, it's cold." And my dad was like, he started laughing. He's like, "What'd you expect it to be?" But I mean, that was my first reaction to snow. I didn't know. I mean, I knew that it was cold weather and all, but I guess I didn't realize that the snow was going to be cold. I probably thought that it would feel like, powdered sugar or washing powder or something. But anyway, that was my first snow. And then the next thing I want to tell you about is my very first time that I ever lived alone. Now, this was in between when my first husband and I had divorced, and I didn't have a boyfriend in my life. And I ended up living in a house, a little bitty house, a very tiny, small little house. It did have 2 bedrooms and 1 bath. It had a living room and a small kitchen. And I actually lived there by myself after I had a boyfriend that moved in there with me, and we broke up, and so I ended up living there by myself. And then I found a better deal on a smaller apartment that had all utilities and everything included for one price that was cheaper than what I was paying on rent on this little house, and so I ended up moving away. And then the next thing that I want to tell you about, my very first time ever drinking. I was about 23, and I think I had just recently separated from my husband, and that was at the period of my life where I was running the bars a lot with my girlfriends and stuff. And I had never had beer before. I didn't know how I was going to react to it or what it was going to be. And I didn't really like the taste of it at first, but I learned to enjoy it eventually, evidently, because I did go out quite a bit whenever I was single like that. But I was about 23 years old when I had my first taste of beer. And then now I want to tell you about the very first thing that I ever sewed. Now, I have my own sewing machine, and I sew all the time. I made my own clothes for a while. I've made curtains and things for the house. I made my car seat covers for the car that I'm driving. But the very first thing that I ever sewed was at my grandma's house. That she taught me how to sew. And this was before she got her sewing machine. The one that she had a sewing machine, but this is before she got her electric sewing machine. It was a treadle sewing machine. And for those of you who are not familiar with a treadle, there's one pedal down at the bottom, a big wide pedal, big enough for 2 feet. And you push down on that pedal with your feet back and forth to make the needle go up and down and sew. And the speed of the needle is controlled by how fast you pump it. And that was the machine that I learned to sew on. And the very first thing that I sewed was a Barbie doll outfit for my Barbie doll. I was so proud that I was able to make that Barbie doll. It was really cute and an interesting experience to learn how to sew on a treadle. And the next thing that I want to tell you about is my very first CD. That's a music CD, for those of you who are thinking I invested. No, I didn't. This was right after CDs first came out on the market. Because as you know, we started out with vinyl records, the big LPs and the little 45s. Then we went to cassettes. Then we went to CDs. And I had just gotten a CD player, and I didn't have anything to play on it. And so the very first thing that I got was, the very first one that I ever bought was Sheryl Crow. And I probably still have that CD somewhere in my collection. I don't hardly listen to CDs at all anymore. I do have a CD player in my car, but since I'm not in my car for any long period of time, I don't listen to it. The CDs that I listen to mostly were when I was traveling back and forth to work, because I commute for about a half hour, so I could turn the CD on and listen to music for a little bit. But when I'm not in my car for that long, there's really no need to have the CD on. And the next thing that I want to talk to you about was the very first time in my life ever that I had surgery. I had never had any broken bones or anything. Now, I did have stitches, but I ended up having a problem with my arm, not able to use it, and it went numb. And they determined that it was in my neck, in my spinal column. I had a perforated disc, bulging disc, and perforated disc that were rubbing together on the bone that was pressing against a nerve and causing me not to be able to use my arm, which I can use it fine now, as you can tell. But anyway, that's what the surgery was. They cut into my neck right here. You probably can't see the scar. They cut into my neck right there. They removed all the damaged disc and the bones that were splayed out, because the rubbing caused the bones to splay out, and that's what was pressing against the nerve. So they removed the damaged bone, they removed the damaged disc, and I actually have an implant in my neck. They ended up putting an implant in there from a bone donor from a cadaver bank. So I have somebody's bone in my neck that I don't even know who it is. Um, uh, After I got my surgery, they got to where when they did those surgeries, they actually took the bone itself from the person that they were doing the surgery on. They took it out of the hip or a leg or someplace like that. But at the time I had my surgery done, it was taken from bodies that were donated to laboratories and science. And the doctor told me I had a donated bone from a cadaver. And it's fine. After the surgery, my arm went back to completely being used. And the next thing that I want to talk to you about was the very first time that I ever went to the theater. This was a walk-in theater. And we did have drive-in theaters, and we did go to them too. The whole family did. But this was a walk-in theater, and it was in Kennett, Missouri. We lived down in Kennett at that time. And my daddy gave me the money to get in. I think he gave me like $1, because at that time it was only 35 cents to get into the movie. And then, of course, the popcorn and the candy and stuff wasn't, probably maybe 10 or 15 cents. I don't know. We may not even bought any candy, but I do know that it only cost 35 cents to get into the movie. And the very first movie that I saw was the Elvis Presley movie, Viva Las Vegas. And I saw it at a little theater down there in Kennett, Missouri. And the next thing that I want to tell you about is the very first time that I ever used an old outdoor toilet. Now, back in the day, before people had indoor plumbing, they had the outhouse, the outdoor toilet. And my grandmother lived in an area where she had an outdoor toilet too. I think they had running water, but for some reason they didn't have a toilet in their house. And so she had an outdoor toilet that we had to go out to and use in the back of the house there. And that was the very first time that I ever used an outdoor toilet. Because my family, we always growed up in a house that had indoor plumbing and electric and everything. But my grandma didn't. They lived out in the country, and that was just the way they lived. And this next thing I want to tell you about is the very first ever scary movie that scared me. I was a young teenager, probably preteen. And it was the movie with Vincent Price in it. It was called The House on Haunted Hill. Now, I do have a copy of that movie in my DVD collection, and I still love watching it, even though it terrified me as a child to watch it. The scene that scared me the most, I remember, was when they walked in the room and they looked up and there was a spot on the ceiling. And somebody asked what it was, and they said it was the blood of somebody that had died. And it dripped down and got on this lady's hand, and she wiped it off. And the creepy guy that was in the movie said, that's not going to help. You've already been marked. That was the part that scared me the most, when she had that blood on her hand because she was marked. And the next thing I want to tell you about was my very first cell phone that I ever got. This was right after cell phones came out. They had been out for a while. I was just kind of behind in getting technology. And it was one of the old Nokia phones. When they first come out, it was about that long, all one piece, black. The screen, the lettering and stuff in the screen was kind of a milky green looking with yellow. You couldn't do, I don't know if you could do texting on it that time or not. Basically, all it was just to make and receive phone calls on. It wasn't a colored screen like the phone that I'm talking on here, with colored videos or anything. Just a plain little green screen that would show the telephone number when somebody called, and you could dial out and they could call you, and that was it. Very simple phone. And the last thing that I want to tell you about involves Jade. No, it doesn't. It is about a dog, and it's about my very first dog that I ever had, that I can remember. I may have had others, but I can't remember them. And I was still living at home. This was actually a family pet. that was at our home. And it was a little to Chihuahua Dachshund mix, probably. It was a small, little, long, skinny dog. It wasn't full-blooded. Her name was Duchess. We had that dog for many, many years, and that dog had many, many litters of puppies because she wasn't fixed, and she pretty much was allowed to roam wherever she wanted, so she was constantly having puppies. So that's it for our video for tonight. Here's Miss Terrified Jade that doesn't want to look at the camera no matter what direction I turn her. We want to thank you guys. Bye. We want to thank you guys for coming and visiting with us tonight. And y'all come back and see us in your time. Bye for this one. Look at the camera.